I'm a magician, and I don't really have any sort of academic expertise. I don't really have any expertise other than just sort of how to trick people, or as Phil points out, do gross sort of things, which I won't be doing for you today because I've moved on to a whole new phase. Not really. I use what I know to try and educate and try and entertain. And I'll give you just a couple little examples of stuff I do, and then I'm going to talk about 5 ways that you can communicate critical thinking. This doesn't mean you have to get a big skeptics club. It could be with your friends. It could be with your children. It could be with your family. In science, a lot of what scientists do, it's about indirect observations. Sometimes we don't exactly get a look at things directly. We have to look through a microscope, or we have to look through a telescope, or we have to listen to sound, and we have to try and see what's there. Now, it would appear a bag like this would be empty if I take it and I shake it, unless you've bought my video shock effects. But if I shake it and that falls out, you'd be wrong and not very impressed. But if that falls out, it kind of makes the point. Sometimes there's a lot more there than you realize. A couple thousand years ago, the Greeks thought they had this matter thing figured out, and then we look even further and we find even more mysterious things, superstrings and all that. Just as a little exercise here, let's try this. I want everybody to take your hands and shake them. I think I did this at the first amazing meeting, but we've got a heck of a lot more people here now. Okay, now relax. I want you to turn to your right and shake your neighbor's hand. 500 people turn to the right. And I love that example. It's just an old MC bit, but it's a great example of, we don't always have enough opportunity to think about things or to watch. Now, the video that Michael showed where you saw the gorilla in the middle of the basketball game, as a magician, I'm the gorilla. Or what I do is kind of like that. And I actually will use, sometimes in some of my presentations, I'll use Bigfoot. Bigfoot will make sort of a little, cameo. Mysteriously, he shows up wherever I'm at. Sometimes, though, not when we're in the same room. Who knows? All right, take your hands back, shake them. Everybody, take your hands. I want you to cross them like that. Like that, okay? And I want you to lock your fingers together. Really, really, really tight. Really, really tight, okay? Your thumb should be pointing towards the ground, right towards the ground, okay? On the count of 3, ready? On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, just twist just like that. Okay, anyhow. These are examples. You can find these. I have segments airing on PBS stations around the country where I teach kids that trick and talk a little bit about misdirection. It's a great way to fool grown-ups because you do the misdirection right in front of people. Learning that people can be fooled is an important lesson when you're young, and it's an important lesson when you're old to realize that you can be fooled. A lot of my work now is just trying to make things fun. I'm not going to do any great research into evolutionary psychology or anything like that. Instead, I'll let Michael put out the great books like Science Friction and Denying History, and I'll put out the Handbook of Superpowers, which is, it's a handbook on how to be a superpowers or do superpowers, which is actually a magic book disguised as that, which has actually got critical thinking and science in there. So it's kind of like a triple layered thing in there. So I love doing that. I love doing fun things. And what Margaret Downey did, that's fantastic. I mean, if I was in high school and I got to go through the Triskaidisca, Floxenoxin, Hill-by-Patient thing, that's a powerful lesson. It's a powerful lesson for somebody older to go see that and to laugh at these sort of beliefs and to see it in this fun environment. And I think that's great. We need more of that. There's a lot of great research being done. What we need more of is more people to communicate these things to the rest of the world. So 5 steps to communicating critical thinking. Drum roll, please. Your goal as a critical thinker, this will be the first part. It's 5 steps, and everybody wants to go to lunch, so I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can because, frankly, I'm hungry too. We're going to do this 5 steps to this. Step 1, your goal as a critical thinker, and that'll be understanding how you can go about this, how to go with what you know, 5 rules for better communication, understanding your audience, and then reaching your audience. Who can communicate? If you're a parent, you have children, your children's friends, you can talk about these ideas to them. If you're a teacher and you have a classroom, it doesn't matter what you teach. You can teach and talk about this in English. You can talk about this in math. I have a lot of fun going to the math classes and using all sorts of things about counterintuitive problems and probability and using visual examples. If you're a professional, no matter what your profession is, you have the opportunity to do this. If you're a hobbyist, you can be anybody. So your goal as a critical thinker, well, many people think they can get into this. get rich. Well, not really, through skepticism. There is another way you can use all this accumulated knowledge and just don't end up like that guy. And the last thing you really want to do is you don't want to end up on like a Michael Shermer shirt. That's just, unless you're Michael Shermer. So think about how you want to use this. So there are 5 areas you can use. Personally, just how to talk to your friends about these things, how to get good arguments, how to explain how these things work. We saw wonderful examples last night when Julia Sweeney did her performance, where we saw how she took these things she was interested in, she did research, she actually read Origin of Species, and then she looked at the arguments about how the eye actually evolved, which we see intelligent people talk about. Intelligent design is big. People who I would otherwise believe to be smart bring this up a lot. So you can do your own sort of personal research just to be able to talk to your friends. Professionally, there are a lot of applications. No matter what profession you're in, there's a lot of opportunity for using critical thinking. Was at a conference this weekend where a lot of the talk was about the scientific approach to business management, and it's scary. There's a reason why Enron happened. It's not just greed, it's people who had sort of really weird ideas about how markets worked, about how the world worked, and just created a disaster. Education, you can use this for your own educational goals. If you want to be a better scientist or a better photographer or better anything, using critical thinking is a way to do that. When it comes to social, just in how you interact with people, you can use critical thinking. If you want to use it to get involved in groups like this is a very neat group of people. Although we share some same views, we're also dissimilar in some ways. And I got introduced to a lot of neat things through my participation in skeptics groups. I mentioned this at our workshop. Evolutionary psychology is something I never would have heard about unless, only briefly, but Michael Shermer's magazines brought that up, and I could talk to people involved with that. And then strategic. You can use critical thinking, you can use your experience in it to help you get to some other place, to help you plan how you do things. A lot of times we just sort of go from school to career and then that's kind of it. But sometimes you can increase where you're doing and how that works for you. Go with what you know. Now, when you want to communicate with your friends, when you want to talk to people or audiences or whatever, it's best to stick what your strengths are. And I've seen that when I go out of my area, I'm not as strong as I can be. And we're all sometimes need to keep that awareness. You're not guilty of it. Some people aren't. But many of you may remember there was a kind of an attempt where we tried in skepticism to try and reach out a youth audience. And I got Randy, Shermer, Phil Plait, and Joe Nickel together, and we tried a music group, Skeptic Boys, which, I thought a couple of the cuts were pretty good. I actually didn't change the guy in the middle because he kind of looked like me, so it made it pretty easy. It wasn't the hit that we thought it would be. It was not the most successful way. So we figured we should skip to skepticism and talking about this and exploring these things. Although I will say that one of the people in our group, Phil Plait, had his own breakout album, which wasn't that big of a hit. Although at Space 1999 conventions, it sells out all the time. So my hat's off to you, Phil. Stick with what you know. Go with what you know. Your experience is what you know. Okay, we had, remember this guy who was at first amazing meeting, Dan Garvin? Okay, cult survivor. He went and he told us what it was like. He wears his shirt that says, I worked for 25 years for Scientology and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. Okay? It was a wonderful, wonderful story. It was from the heart and it was about what he went through. And he had no problem telling us, his own perceptions of his failings as a human being, and we just admired him for his strengths. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to talk about experience. Shermer talks about in one of his books about going on a long-distance bicycle marathon and hallucinating. I think he got abducted by aliens, which might be part of being from California, too. I don't know. Education. Now, Dan's example was he had just an experience that he had that was able to shape him. Now, some people have an education that enables them to communicate to people. Carl Sagan, astronomer. Really good astronomer. You're great too, Phil. No, and maybe we're fortunate that we have two really gifted astronomers to talk about that. And Carl went beyond that. He could talk to us a lot about history and culture and the history of science and philosophy. And that was wonderful that he shared that knowledge that he had, that he got in an academic environment with the rest of us. How many of you have seen Cosmos, the series? Okay, look at everybody who has not seen it and tell them to see it. See it. It's beautiful. It is just a wonderful way to look at it. They've updated, they've added in new data, so it's not just something that's hasn't been brought up to date. So you can.